Philippe Sands è uno dei più grandi esperti al mondo di diritto internazionale. Ha seguito moltissimi casi. Uno di questi è il caso delle isole Chagos, che ha ispirato questo suo libro, L'ultima colonia, edito in Italia da Guanda, e proprio questo suo libro è stato presentato all'Università Cattolica in un incontro che è stato organizzato dall'Alta Scuola Federico Stella per la giustizia penale. Philippe Sands è uno studioso, è un avvocato, ha un'esperienza anche personale per certi aspetti di queste vicende e siamo molto lieti di averlo qui con noi per questa intervista. Welcome at Università Cattolica.
It's lovely to be at your university.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your presence. And I think that in your work, in your books, there is always something very personal. In East-West Street, you told the story of your grandfather who came from Lviv as a Jewish, as a refugee, and so on. And in this book, The Last Colony, you show how important can be the story of a single person to understand the history of a country. And can you tell me something about this personal method of research and storytelling?
I think one of the things I've come to learn is that it's often easier to understand the complexities of big political, historical, legal dramas through individual human lives. And in relation to that, I've also learned, maybe because of the work that I do as a university professor, but who does cases before international courts, that individuals can make a very big difference. An individual lawyer, an individual judge, a witness. And I think it's one of the main emblematic themes that I've focused on is the place of the individual. And I take the individual because I've come to understand that by telling human stories, you can reach a much bigger audience. I could tell this same story of the last colony as a technical, legal account.
And it is too.
And it is too. And 11 people would read it, and I would be very happy. But the moment you introduce the human element, the audience becomes enormous, limitless. And in a sense, the book is an act of advocacy, like my other books, to get more people to understand the significance of this thing called international law.
And in this peculiar case, the main character of your book is a very interesting and touching one. Can you tell something about this woman, Lisbeth Elise?
Lisbeth Elise is a very special person, and it's been an absolute privilege to meet her. She was born in 1953 on a very small island called Perros Banhos, one of the 58 islands of the Chagos archipelago in the Indian Ocean. When she was born, it was a part of the British colony of Mauritius. And when she was 20 years old, she lived there very happily. She had just got married. She was pregnant. The British came and said to her, "You will leave tomorrow. One suitcase, your island is being closed." And she was deported. And she has spent 50 years wanting to go back. She's a very humane person. She's a very intelligent person, great dignity and courage. She can't read and she can't write. And when I came to know her, I understood that the judges of the International Court of Justice needed to hear her voice, because her voice tells in the most powerful and simple of terms what happened to her and why she wants to go home. She is a remarkable person.
Yes, and the story of your book, the history of Chagos Isles, is also remarkable because almost incredible for a reader to see how an important country, a democratic country such as the United Kingdom, has still behaved as a colonial power in the same 8 years, in the same moment, decolonization became such a big issue. And there is a part of public declaration in praise of decolonization, and on the other hand, there is this small island in the ocean where the colonialism is still living, is still ruling. How happened?
Well, it's, as always, the gulf between what governments say and what they do. You have to go back to the 1960s. I was a child, 5, 6 years old. I knew nothing about this story. There was a colony, a British colony called Mauritius, which included the Chagos archipelago. And Mauritians wanted independence, and the British said, okay, you can have independence, but we're going to keep the Chagos archipelago. This was completely not justified. It was, in fact, many people thought illegal, but that was what the British government did, because they wanted to give one of the islands to the Americans as a military base, Diego Garcia. And they decided to do it. They separated Chagos from Mauritius. They removed the entire population. They closed all the islands. And they gave one of the islands to the Americans, who created this very large military base. I was asked by the Prime Minister of Mauritius in 2010 to design a legal strategy to get the islands back to Mauritius and allow the Chagosians to return. And ultimately, as I tell in the book, this proved to be successful. In 2019, so very recently, the International Court of Justice, with the help of the testimony of Lisby Elysée, ruled without dissent on the merits that Chagos belongs not to the United Kingdom, but to Mauritius, and the British must leave. What I think is so shocking to me about the story is that right up until a few years ago, the British were still arguing that Chagos was theirs and acting in a way to stop the original community from returning. And they used the most terrible derogatory terms in relation to the former inhabitants. It's not a good story. It may sound like an insignificant story because the number of people affected is not enormous. It's 2,000 people. But I think it's emblematic of a country's attitude and behavior, that it can behave and act in this way. And so I think the story has a much broader resonance because of its human significance and the duplicity of the British government. In fact, I've come to understand that the story reflects an inability of Britain to be honest in recognizing aspects of its past. And it is that dishonesty which I think has caused so much difficulty for the United Kingdom, including right now in relation to Brexit, this idea that it has a certain place in the world, which is no longer a realistic position.
So in a way, Brexit is, the mentality of Brexit is related to you with this colonial attitude.
Yeah, because Brexit is essentially pushed amongst the politicians by people who want to make Britain great again, who somehow think that once you remove the shackles of the European Union, Britain's rightful place as a great world power will somehow be restored. Of course, we've now had Brexit for 6 or 7 years, and it's come as a bit of a shock that actually it's a disaster. Politically, culturally, economically, we look and we look and we look for the benefits and the advantages, and we can't find any. In fact, as I describe in this book, Brexit helped Mauritius, because what happened at the United Nations was that with the vote at Brexit in June 2016, Britain lost international authority. Its support evaporated, literally from one day to the next. And this successful outcome for Mauritius and for the Chagosians, I think, I hate to say it, is in part due to Brexit.
Back to Chagos again. In a way, the last colony can be read as a symbol, the paradox that I think is at the basis of international law. International law is something that seems so easy to understand, so obvious. Each people must be free, each country must decide for themselves and so on. But in reality, it is so difficult to apply, isn't it?
So the beating heart of the story in legal terms is this right that is known as the right to self-determination. It seems, as you say, self-evident. Every community should be able to decide for itself its own future. But of course, the reality is that the practical application of that principle, of that right, is contested and is difficult. Again, ironically, Mauritius, I think, has been helped greatly by the story of Ukraine. Because here we have a situation in which Russia has occupied large parts of Ukraine completely illegally, imposed, if you like, a new form of colonialism on Ukraine, the Greater Russia, and that gives rise to the right of self-determination for Ukrainians. And in fact, when the decision of the International Court arrived in February 2019, the initial reaction of the British government was to say, no, we're not going to respect this, we're going to carry on, Chagos belongs to us, we're going to pretend there's no decision of the International Court. Why did the position change a few months ago? It changed because of Ukraine. It changed because it became impossible for the United Kingdom to sustain the argument that it and other countries should be helping Ukraine remove Russia from its illegal occupation of Ukraine, whilst simultaneously illegally occupying a part of Africa. And many African countries who are not stupid said this is total hypocrisy. This is a total double standard. And so now the British have finally changed position.
Ukrainian war is a very relevant issue. And it is so relevant, I think, for an international lawyer because suddenly, or not so suddenly, it depends, war is back as an instrument, as to resolve international crisis. And you find it affordable, you find it maybe also efficient. And I think it is a great challenge for international law.
Well, I mean, war never went away. And wars, particularly in Africa and other parts of the world, continued after 1945. What Europe escaped, and that's why this is so significant for Europe, is that for the first time in 75 years, war has come back to the heart of Europe. And so we are shocked. But in my world of international law, many countries in the global south point to the hypocrisy of Europe and the United States and suddenly saying, oh my God, there's a war in Europe, we better do something about it. Whereas with these other wars in Syria or in Congo or in other parts of the world, they didn't care so much. But I think for Europeans, this is a wake-up call. And if you go back to that moment in 1945, and in particular the Nuremberg trial, which I wrote about in East-West Street in particular, the heart of the Nuremberg process was the crime of aggression, waging an illegal war. From the illegal occupation of Poland began all the other crimes within the jurisdiction of the Nuremberg Tribunal. And so it is with Ukraine. War crimes are terrible, crimes against humanity are terrible. If genocide is happening, that's terrible too. But actually, the origin is the decision to go to war. And that's why, for me, the accent has to be put on that decision to go to war and its illegality. I wrote a piece about it in the Financial Times in February 2022, when the war began, calling for the creation of a special criminal tribunal for the crime of aggression. And that is now happening. It's in the process of being created, and I'm very pleased. And it puts the accent on the main person responsible for this horror, which is Vladimir Putin.
And Ukraine war is also part of your history, your personal story in a way, because your grandfather came from
Leopolis.
Leopolis,
as you
Lviv.
call it,
Yes.
Lviv, which is the same place as Leopolis.
Yeah, of course.
And there used to be flights from Milan to Leopolis, one of the few places you could get ways. When I first started going to Lviv, I went for the first time in 2010, you could only go via three places. There were no direct flights from London. It was Munich, Vienna, or Milan. And that's because of the historic relationship. And one of the things that is interesting about Lviv is that it has fantastic coffee. And one of the reasons that it has fantastic coffee is that it was on a main trading route with Venice. And so Italian traders brought coffee backwards and forwards. But yes, my grandfather was born there in 1904. It's a magnificent place. And so I feel very connected to the place and obviously to the war and to the Ukrainian struggle. I mean, that's not to say that I excuse the West and NATO for mistakes that have been made. I've come to understand that Ukraine is a particular place. It is neither East nor West. It straddles the two. And I think we need to be respectful of that special place that it has. But that doesn't in any way justify what Mr. Putin did, which is outrageous and manifestly illegal. And the sooner he is gone, the better.
Thank you so much. We can hope that this coffee road maybe also become a road for peace.
It will become again.
It will become,
It will become
yes.
again. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.